Have you ever heard a mountain breathe? Not metaphorically, but literally. At over 8 kilometers above sea level, Everest doesn't whisper or roar. It stays silent. But that silent cold, that endless emptiness, they press on the mind harder than any storm. There are no birds here, no trees, not even the sound of your own heartbeat, only the wind whistling through the rocks and the heavy, ragged breathing of someone who dared climb higher than they should. Everest isn't just the highest point on Earth. It's a challenge, an icy wall thrown down by nature to everyone who thinks they're strong. And strangely, the more we learn about it, the less conquered it seems. Yes, thousands have stood on its summit, but the mountain remains the master. It decides who comes back, and who stays forever, frozen in a bright jacket, part of what's known as the Rainbow Valley. So why do people go there, knowing the price? Why pay tens of thousands of dollars, risk their lives, lose fingers, eyesight, sometimes even their sanity, for just a few minutes on the roof of the world? Maybe it's not really about the summit. Maybe it's something deeper. The desire to test what a human is capable of when the body says enough, but the spirit whispers just a little more. We're interested in something else. How Everest became a symbol of human ambition and then turned into a tourist brand. How an unreachable giant became a crowded route filled with traffic jams, trash, and scandals. We'll trace the journey from the first 19th century surveyors to today's weekend climbers, from Mallory's romance to the commercial tragedies of 1996. And yes, you, the viewer, are part of this story too. Because anyone who's ever wondered, could I do it, is already standing at the base of this mountain, even if they've never strapped on crampons or bought an oxygen tank. Because it's not really about the climb. It's about why we need such trials at all. So let's begin, not from the summit, but from the very start. From the moment when Everest had no name, and no one knew it was the tallest. Until the mid-19th century, Everest wasn't Everest. It didn't even have a name in Western cartography. To Tibetans, it was Chomolungma, Mother of the Universe. To Nepalis, Sagarmatha, Forehead of the Sky. But to British surveyors busy with the largest mapping project in India, it was simply Peak 15, or, slightly earlier, Peak B. Yes, literally, a letter. Because back then, no one suspected this icy massif in the Himalayas would surpass every known mountain on Earth. It all began with the Great Trigonometrical Survey, launched in 1802. This wasn't just a scientific mission, it was an act of imperial knowledge. The British Empire measured the land as if weighing its worth. The more precise the calculations, the firmer the control. Leading this colossal project was Sir George Everest, a stubborn, meticulous man obsessed with accuracy. He never saw the mountain that would later bear his name. Yet it was his methods that allowed its height to be determined with astonishing precision for the time. In 1852, Radhanath Sikdar, an Indian mathematician and computer working in Calcutta, made a discovery that stunned his colleagues. By comparing angular measurements from different survey stations, he concluded Peak B was taller than the reigning champion, Kangchenjunga. His report was met with skepticism. How could that be? Kangchenjunga was considered unbeatable, but repeated calculations confirmed it. Yes, this was the new queen of the world. Height, approximately 29,000 feet. To avoid the impression of rounding, and to show the figure wasn't approximate, they officially announced 29,002 feet. And so the legend was born. But here's the paradox. When the Royal Geographical Society decided to give the mountain a name in 1865, they They chose not the local Tibetan or Nepali name, but an English one, Everest, in honor of a man who had absolutely no connection to the mountain itself. George Everest objected. He argued that India had its own names and they deserved respect. But his voice drowned in the noise of imperial logic. If we measured it, we own it. If we named it, it's ours. From that moment on, the mountain ceased to be a sacred place. It became an object, a trophy, a goal. The colonial gaze turned Chomolungma into a challenge for the white man, not so much physical as symbolic. Conquering Everest meant proving the superiority of civilization, technology, and will, especially after other last frontiers, like the North and South Poles, had already been reached. By the early 20th century, the idea of climbing Everest was no longer abstract. It became an obsession, the fixation of the British elite. After World War I, as Europe lay in ruins and a new generation searched for meaning, the mountain appeared as a pure, almost mythical test. No politics, no trench mud, just man versus nature, just honor and courage. But access to the mountain was closed. Tibet and Nepal barred foreigners. Only in 1921, after years of diplomatic effort, did the British gain permission for their first reconnaissance expedition. And that's when the real race began. Not for land, not for resources, but for glory. For the right to say, we were first. Strange, isn't it? People are willing to die just to place a foot on a patch of snow the wind will erase within an hour. But it's precisely this irrationality that makes Everest's story so deeply human. Because there's no logic here, only the thirst to overcome. And a question that echoes again and again. Why? Now imagine two men standing at the base of this mountain in 1921. One is a poet at heart, a mountaineer by calling. His name is George Mallory, and he will soon ask the question that becomes the epigraph to the entire saga. Because it's there. But before we hear his voice, let's trace how romance collided with the harsh reality of avalanches, cold, and death. 1921. The British expedition steps onto Everest slopes for the first time. This isn't a summit assault, it's reconnaissance. A team of 13, geologists, topographers, and climbers, ventures into the unknown. No one knows if a route even exists. Maps are inaccurate, paths are blank slates. Yet the spirit of the age demands an attempt. Among them is 33-year-old George Mallory, a teacher from a prestigious school, poetic by nature, and a climber with a reputation. He'd already conquered many alpine peaks, but here, everything is different. Here, even the air betrays you. The expedition moves slowly. They explore northern approaches from Tibet, the only accessible route until the 1950s. For weeks, Mallory and his companion Guy Bullock wander across glaciers, scramble over scree slopes, searching for a weak spot in the mountain's icy armor. And they find one, the Northeast Ridge. The route seems possible, though insanely difficult. At 7,000 meters, they pause. The summit feels close. But beyond that point lies only theory. They have no oxygen, no proper gear, no experience at such altitudes. They retreat, but return with hope. It's achievable. Already then, Mallory writes to his wife, "I feel we can do it." His words overflow with noble enthusiasm. For him, the climb isn't about records. It's almost a spiritual act. He believes in the beauty of effort, the purity of purpose. And that belief is contagious. In Britain, he's seen as a new Livingstone,
an explorer venturing where others fear to tread.
In 1922, a new expedition returns, with a clear goal: the first ascent. Now they have oxygen apparatuses, bulky, unreliable, but symbols of progress. Mallory is back. In May, the team makes its first summit push. 3 climbers reach above 8,000 meters, an unprecedented altitude for the time. They don't reach the top, but they prove something vital. A human can survive where scientists once claimed life was impossible. Then tragedy strikes. During a second attempt in June, a group of 7 Sherpa porters and 2 Britons ascends the north face. Suddenly, an avalanche breaks loose. 7 people die instantly. These are the first deaths on Everest. And immediately, the question arises: should we continue? Debate erupts, not just in the press, but within the Royal Geographical Society. Critics call the expedition reckless. Why sacrifice lives for sporting ambition? Newspapers ask. Hardest of all is the accusation of colonial indifference. 7 Sherpas perished, yet their names aren't even mentioned in official reports. Their background: expendable. Mallory is deeply shaken. He personally helps bury the dead and writes letters to their families. But he doesn't abandon the idea. For him, it's no longer just a challenge. It's a duty, almost redemption. He convinces sponsors one more attempt is needed. And in 1924, a 3rd expedition is assembled. By now, attitudes toward Everest are shifting. Romance gives way to tension. Every step is measured not just in meters, but in risk. Yet the spirit of the age still demands closure. The British Empire awaits its hero. The world awaits an answer. Can anyone reach the roof of the world? Interestingly, Mallory himself wasn't obsessed with glory. He doubted. In one interview before departure asked, "Why do this?" He replied, "Because it's there." The phrase becomes legendary, but few remember what he added right after, though perhaps it's foolish. In those words lies the essence of early mountaineering, a blend of poetry, fear, and inner conflict. Technically, the 1924 expedition is better prepared. There's radio communication, though unstable, improved oxygen systems, more porters. But nature doesn't soften. Everest's weather remains unpredictable even today, and back then, it was an absolute mystery. The team knows. They have only a few good weather days per season. Miss the window, and they'll have to wait a year. Mallory chooses his partner, 22-year-old Andrew Irvine. Young, strong, technically skilled, he'd even modified the oxygen sets himself. But he has almost no high-altitude experience. Many consider the choice risky. Yet Mallory sees in Irvine not just an assistant, but a kindred spirit. Perhaps even his last chance. When they leave Camp 4 at 7,700 meters for the final time, no one knows it's goodbye. But you, the viewer, know. Within hours, they'll vanish. And one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century will begin. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because in those days, in May and June 1924, the fate of 2 men isn't the only thing being decided. So too is Everest's symbolic meaning. Will it become a place of heroism or a graveyard of illusions? For now, imagine 2 men climbing into white emptiness, not knowing if they'll return. And ask yourself the same question a New York Times reporter posed in 1922. Isn't human life worth more than any summit? There was no answer then, and perhaps there still isn't. June 2nd, 1924. Early morning on Everest's north face. The air is crystal clear. The wind has died down. Days like this are rare here. George Mallory and Andrew Irvine leave Camp 4 at 7,700 meters. They carry 2 days' worth of supplies, oxygen cylinders, rope, and ice axes. Their goal? The summit. This is their final attempt of the season. If they fail, the expedition will go home. Below them, at Camp 6, geologist and climber Noel Odell remains. He watches the weather, waiting for a signal. Around 12:50 p.m., he glances up and sees a brief break in the clouds. Against the snowy slope, 2 dark figures. They're moving fast, very fast, and they're already above the second step, one of the route's most difficult sections, located at approximately 8,600 meters. Odell is certain it's Mallory and Irvine. And if they've cleared the second step by midday, the summit is within reach. Then the clouds close again. He never sees them again. This is the last confirmed sighting of their lives. Hours later, Odell climbs higher to meet them. But no one is there, only wind. He waits until evening, then descends. The next day, searches. Nothing. Just deep snow and silence. And so the legend begins. The question that has haunted historians, climbers, and the simply curious for a century now. Did they reach the summit? On one hand, everything was against them. Their gear was primitive. Leather boots, woolen gloves, oxygen apparatuses weighing over 13 kilograms that often broke down. The weather could shift at any moment. And the second step, a nearly vertical 30-meter rock wall. Climbing it without modern crampons or protection would be nothing short of heroic. But on the other hand, pace. If Odell truly saw them above the second step at 12:50, they had enough time to reach the summit by 2 to 3 p.m. and begin their descent in daylight. And Mallory wasn't just an experienced climber, he was a genius of mountain movement. His climbing style was described as smooth as a cat. Perhaps he found a way. For decades, the mystery remained unsolved, until 1999, when an American expedition discovered George Mallory's body at 8,160 meters. He lay face down, partially buried in snow. One arm stretched forward, as if trying to brace himself during a fall. His skull was fractured. He clearly died from impact. The age of his clothing, personal documents, and eyeglasses all matched. But the key question remained unanswered. Had he stood on the summit? Searchers hoped to find a photograph of his wife, Ruth, the one he'd promised to leave at the highest point on Earth. The photo wasn't there. Yet that's not proof he didn't summit. Perhaps he simply didn't pull it from his inner pocket in extreme cold. Or maybe he lost it during the fall. Another crucial detail, there was no oxygen cylinder on his body. And Irvine was the one responsible for maintaining their oxygen system. If they were descending after a successful summit, the cylinders would have been empty and likely discarded. But if they died during the ascent, the cylinders should have been with them. Mallory's missing cylinder might suggest they'd already completed the climb. Yet there's a counter-argument. The cylinder could have slipped off during the fall, or been swept away by an avalanche. What about Irvine? His body has never been found. Though in 1975, a Chinese climber reported seeing a European corpse near the northeast ridge, possibly Irvine, but no confirmation followed. Technical analysis of the route also offers no definitive answer. In 2007, famed climber Conrad Anker repeated the climb without oxygen, wearing a replica of 1924-era clothing. He scaled the second step in 50 minutes without modern gear. Conclusion? It was possible. But possible doesn't mean real.
Even if they reached the summit, the descent, exhausted, freezing, oxygen-starved, would have been nearly impossible, especially if one of them was injured. It's becoming clear we'll likely never know the truth, and perhaps that's for the best, because it's precisely this uncertainty that makes Mallory and Irvine's story so powerful. It's not about a record. It's about the edge of human aspiration, about going where there's no guarantee of return, simply because you feel you must. So what do you think, viewer? Were they on top? Imagine that moment, if it happened. Two men stand on the roof of the world. No flags, no cameras, no applause. Just wind, cold, and the knowledge that no one may ever learn of it, perhaps not for centuries. Is there more heroism in that than in any officially documented ascent? Many believe that even if they didn't reach the summit, their attempt matters more than many successes, because they weren't chasing fame, they were chasing an idea, and they died without ever receiving recognition.
But Everest's story doesn't end with the tragedy of 1924. The mountain isn't forgotten. On the contrary, it becomes an obsession for new generations. And among them appear not only scientists and athletes, but mystics. One of the strangest episodes in Everest's history involves a man who wasn't a climber at all. His name was Maurice Wilson, and he believed he could conquer Everest through the power of prayer. How is that possible? How could someone with no experience, no training, and no permit attempt such a thing? And why is his story not just a joke, but a troubling mirror of human obsession? Imagine a man who's never been in mountains higher than 1,000 meters, who doesn't know how to use an ice axe, can't figure out how to strap on crampons, and believes oxygen cylinders are unnecessary. Now, imagine this man decides to conquer Everest, alone, without a team, without experience, without permission, and with the firm conviction that prayer will shield him from cold and altitude. This isn't fiction. This is Maurice Wilson, a World War I veteran, a London restaurateur, an occult enthusiast, and a devoted believer in faith healing. In the early 1930s, he's in personal crisis, divorce, depression, a search for meaning. And he finds it in Everest, not as a climber, but as a messiah. He's convinced that if he reaches the summit and prays for peace, he can stop the looming new war. Sounds insane? Perhaps. But Wilson wasn't just a dreamer, he was obsessed, and willing to pay the price. In 1933, he buys an airplane, an old de Havilland Gypsy Moth, and announces his plan. Fly it straight to Everest's base, land somewhere, then climb on foot. British aviation authorities deny him a permit. He ignores the ban. In May 1933, he takes off and crash lands almost immediately in Yorkshire. Engine failure, damage, but he doesn't give up. For a year he trains, in Scotland, on the slopes of Ben Nevis. His preparation would be a joke to any serious mountaineer. Walks in heavy clothing, a few nights in the cold. He reads books about past expeditions, but doesn't grasp even basic principles of acclimatization. Nevertheless, in 1934, he secretly departs for India. There, the next phase of his adventure begins. He disguises himself as a monk, shaves his head, dons Tibetan robes, takes the name Han. His goal? Sneak into Tibet, closed to foreigners. He hires several local porters, promising them money and spiritual enlightenment. They trek across passes, but quickly realize this monk knows nothing. He suffers from altitude sickness at just 4,000 meters. He's vomiting, barely able to stand. His first summit attempt ends at 6,000 meters. He turns back, not because of danger, but because he felt a sign from above. A second attempt goes slightly higher, but fails again. The porters refuse to go further. One later recalls,
He spoke to the mountain, said it was listening to him. The third attempt comes in spring 1935. This time, he goes alone. He's last seen at the base of the North Col. He never returns. His body is found later that year, frozen inside a tent at around 7,400 meters. Beside him, a diary filled to the last page. Final entry. Today I feel I will reach the summit. God is with me. On him, no oxygen, no proper clothing, not even a decent tent. Only a Bible and a photograph of the wife he'd long since separated from. For decades, Wilson's story was dismissed as a cautionary anecdote, the ultimate example of how not to approach the mountain. But today, it's read differently. Yes, he was mad, but in his madness lay purity of intent. He wasn't chasing fame, didn't sell exclusive rights, didn't seek sponsors. He walked for an idea, even if it was an illusion. And he died without ever turning back. Strangely, his story echoes Mallory's. Both were obsessed. Both were romantics. But while Mallory belonged to a system, British expeditions, science, mountaineering, Wilson stood outside it entirely. He was the voice of a lone individual, challenging not just nature, but common sense itself. And yet, his death became a warning. After him, Tibetan authorities tightened border controls even further. The climbing community understood. Everest tolerates no imposters. Here, courage alone isn't enough. You also need respect. For the mountain, its history, and those who've already died trying to understand its language. But if Wilson was the voice of solitude, the next chapter is the triumph of collective effort. 3 decades after his death, Everest would finally be conquered, not by prayer, not by obsession, but by precise planning, discipline, and partnership. And in that success lay more than human victory over nature. It was a symbol of a new world, a post-imperial world, a world where the hero wasn't necessarily a British officer in a tweed jacket, but a man in handmade leather boots, born in a village at the mountain's foot. Who is he? You probably already know. But let's return to that moment, May 1953, when the whole world held its breath. For now, ask yourself, what's more terrifying, the icy slope or the certainty that you're right, even when everyone tells you otherwise?
Hillary and Norgay's victory in 1953. May 1953. The 9th British expedition reaches its decisive moment. After decades of attempts, tragedies, and failures, everything now hinges on a single summit push. This time, the team is better prepared than ever before. 400 porters, 10 tons of gear, improved oxygen systems, and meticulous logistics. Leading the expedition is John Hunt, a former Army officer, methodical and disciplined, who understands that success depends not on one hero, but on an entire chain of effort. And yet, heroes are still needed. And there are 2 of them. The first pair, Tom Bordelin and Charles Evans, is given the right to make the initial attempt. On May 26th, they climb above 8,700 meters, nearly reach the summit, but are forced to turn back due to malfunctioning oxygen equipment. They're furious. But according to plan, there's a backup. A second team will go 2 days later. And so, on May 28th at 6:30 a.m., Edmund Hillary, a New Zealand beekeeper and self-taught mountaineer, and Tenzing Norgay, a Sherpa with unmatched Everest experience, depart from Camp 9 at 8,500 meters. They have one chance. The weather is perfect. The wind has died down,
The snow is firm and stable. The ascent is grueling. On the South Col route, they face their greatest obstacle, the now famous Hillary Step, a near-vertical ice wall 12 meters high. Hillary, leading, chips away at the ice with his axe, kicks in his crampons, searches for holds. Behind him, Tenzing secures the rope. The tension is unbearable. If one slips, both will die. But they make it through. At 11:30 a.m., the summit. Hillary would later recall, "I saw that beyond the ridge, there was no other mountain, only sky." Tenzing silently places chocolate candies into the snow as an offering to the gods. They spend 15 minutes there. They take photos. Hillary photographs Tenzing, but no one photographs Hillary, a detail that would later spark debate. They bury a note with the names of the entire team. Then they begin their descent. When they return to camp, the news explodes like a bomb. A radio message is sent to London, and by happy coincidence arrives on May 29th, the very day of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. Newspapers proclaim, "A crown for the Queen, a summit for the Empire." But times are changing. This is no longer an empire, but a commonwealth. And the hero is not just a Briton, but a man from the Himalayas. Tenzing Norgay becomes a symbol. To Nepal, he is national treasure. To the world, he is living proof that Sherpas are not mere porters, but equal partners in humanity's greatest feats. He will never say who stepped onto the summit first. "We climbed together," he repeats for the rest of his life. And Hillary? He initially declines a knighthood, but later accepts the title of Sir, solely to gain influence and help the Sherpa people. For the rest of his life, he builds schools, hospitals, and bridges in the Himalayas. His motto? Don't just take photos from the mountain. Leave something good behind. The 1953 victory closes one era. Everest will never again be a blank spot on the map. But it opens another, the age of accessibility. If two men could do it, why couldn't others? It is here that the paradox of the modern Everest is born. The more it is conquered, the less conquered it feels. Because every new ascent demands more oxygen, more money, more risk, and offers less of the pioneer's spirit. But before we speak of crowds and commerce, we must understand. What happens to the human body above 8,000 meters? Why is this zone called the death zone? And why, even today with modern gear, does every step there become a fight for survival? The answer lies in physiology, in blood chemistry, in the very edge of what is humanly possible. Are you ready to look inside that limit? Above 8,000 meters begins a place where the human body doesn't just suffer, it begins to break down. This isn't metaphor, it's medical fact. Climbers call this region the death zone, and for good reason. Here, atmospheric pressure drops to 1/3 of sea level. Oxygen in the air is so scarce that the lungs can no longer absorb it efficiently. Every breath delivers only the illusion of breathing. What happens to the body? Let's start with the brain. As early as 7,500 meters, cognitive function declines by 30 to 40%. Attention scatters. Memory falters. Simple decisions, like zipping a jacket or checking a rope harness, become near impossible tasks. Many climbers describe this as mental fog. They know they need to do something, but can't recall what. Hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, triggers cerebral edema. Fluid accumulates between brain cells, pressure builds, headaches become unbearable, nausea, vomiting, loss of coordination follow. A person may begin to ramble, see hallucinations, talk to imaginary companions. Sometimes they simply fall asleep and never wake up. But the brain isn't the only organ under attack. The lungs suffer too. Due to pressure differentials, capillaries in the alveoli rupture. Fluid floods the lungs. Pulmonary edema sets in. Breathing grows harder, as if a vice is tightening around the chest. A cough producing pink, frothy sputum is a sure sign the person has only hours to live, unless they descend immediately.
And even if the brain and lungs hold out, the heart is pushed to its limit. It beats twice as fast, struggling to compensate for oxygen shortage. Blood pressure fluctuates wildly. The risk of stroke or heart attack multiplies. Meanwhile, core body temperature plummets. Fingers, nose, ears freeze within minutes at the slightest pause. Third-degree frostbite is common, even among experienced climbers. Strangely, full acclimatization is impossible in the death zone. The body can adapt to 7,000 meters, but above that threshold, it merely dies slowly. That's why all serious expeditions rely on supplemental oxygen. Without it, the chance of survival on the summit is minimal, even for those born in the Himalayas. Yes, Sherpas possess genetic adaptations, higher hemoglobin levels, more efficient metabolism. But they aren't immortal. Many die in the death zone, not from lack of preparation, but because they're pushed beyond what physiology allows. Another myth: you can rest on the summit. In reality, you can't. The body doesn't recover. It keeps deteriorating. Every minute above 8,000 meters is a debt that must be paid on the descent. That's why seasoned climbers spend no more than 15 to 20 minutes on the summit. Sometimes they don't stop at all. Just snap a photo and head down immediately. But descent isn't salvation. Collapse often strikes then. After the strain of ascent, the body shuts down. Fatigue, dehydration, hypoglycemia all accumulate. Many die after a successful summit, simply failing to reach camp. It becomes clear: conquering Everest isn't just about climbing up. It's about surviving twice. Once on the way up, and again on the way down. And yet people keep going. Why? Perhaps because in this battle against their own bodies, they feel truly alive. Or maybe because there's no other way to prove to themselves you can walk through the impossible. But behind every such climber stands another person. The one who carries their oxygen bottles, cooks their food, repairs their tent, risks their life for someone else's dream. Their name rarely makes headlines, yet without them, no record would ever be possible. Who are these invisible heroes? And why do their sacrifices remain in the shadows? The answer lies in the next chapter. Because the story of Everest isn't just the story of those who stood on the summit. It's the story of those who never aimed for it, but made it possible for others. When you hear the name Everest, whose faces come to mind? Hillary? Norgay? Maybe Mallory? Now ask yourself, how many Sherpa names do you know? Even one? The Sherpas are a people living in eastern Nepal, in the Solukhumbu region. Their name comes from the Tibetan words Sharpa, people from the east. For centuries, they lived in harmony with the mountains, not seeking to conquer them, but honoring them as sacred. But with the arrival of Western expeditions, their role changed. From local inhabitants, they became porters,
guides, and safety anchors, and, in essence, the backbone of all Everest mountaineering. Their physical endurance is astonishing. They carry loads of 30 to 40 kilograms to altitudes above 6,000 meters, without supplemental oxygen, often in simple sneakers or handmade boots. They fix ropes through the Khumbu icefall, establish climbing lines, rebuild camps after storms. Without them, no modern expedition could climb higher than base camp. But the price of this endurance is high. Sherpas die on Everest more than any other group. Statistically, over 1/3 of all deaths on the mountain are Sherpas. The reason isn't just risk, it's social inequality. They earn tens of times less than Western guides. Their insurance payouts are minimal. If a Sherpa dies, his family receives around $15,000, while a Western client pays $45,000 to $100,000 for the climb. In 2014, a tragedy shook the entire climbing community. An avalanche in the Khumbu icefall killed 16 Sherpas, the deadliest single incident in Everest's history. In response, Sherpas went on strike. They demanded higher compensation, better insurance, and respect. Many expeditions that year were canceled. For the first time, the world heard, "We are not expendable." Since then, conditions have improved slightly. Support funds for bereaved families have emerged, along with training programs and Sherpa-owned guiding cooperatives. But the gap remains. Western media still refer to them as helpers, even though many are among the world's most experienced climbers. Some, like Kami Rita Sherpa, have summited Everest more than 25 times, more than any national team on Earth. Tenzing Norgay became an exception, a symbol, but for most Sherpas, fame is out of reach. Their heroism stays off camera. Who knows that it was a Sherpa who fixed the final rope before the 1953 summit? Who remembers that it was a Sherpa who first discovered Mallory's body? And yet, they keep going, not for glory, but for their family's survival. For many villages in Khumbu, this is the only source of income. One successful season can feed a family for a year. So, despite the risks, they return. But consider this. Without Sherpas, would Everest be what we know it to be? Would there even be thousands of ascents? Or would the mountain have remained what it was for Tibetans and Nepalis, a place of power, not a tourist attraction? Their story is a reminder. Behind every hero stands a whole team of invisible people. And true honor isn't about being the first to step on the summit. It's about acknowledging those who helped you get there. But what happens when this system breaks down? When respect gives way to chaos and heroism to commerce? The answer lies in Everest's darkest corner, a place climbers call the Rainbow Valley. Are you ready to look at an open-air graveyard? High on Everest's northeast ridge, between 8,000 and 8,500 meters, lies a stretch climbers call Rainbow Valley. The name sounds poetic, but in truth, it's one of the darkest places on Earth. There are no flowers here, no rainbows, only bright jackets, backpacks, oxygen masks, and the frozen bodies of those who couldn't make it down. Why rainbow? Because the dead remain in the gear they wore. Red, yellow, blue, green suits, splashes of color against an endless white void. The wind doesn't blow them away. Snow doesn't fully bury them. They become landmarks, markers of danger, and a reminder, here, the mountain decides who lives and who doesn't. One of the most famous figures in this valley is Green Boots. The nickname belongs to Indian climber Tsewang Paljor, who died on the night of May 11, 1996, during the infamous Disaster A11, 1996. during the infamous disaster. His body lay in a small limestone cave on the north route. For years, climbers passed within centimeters of him. Some even used his resting place as shelter from the wind. Around 2014, his body was likely moved or buried under snow, but the legend remains. Yet Green Boots is just one among hundreds. Estimates suggest that between 200 and 300 people rest on Everest's slopes, most of them in the death zone. They aren't buried. They can't be. Retrieving a body above 8,000 meters is nearly impossible. It takes a team of 6 to 8 people, specialized equipment, and perfect weather. And every hour spent at that altitude is a life-threatening risk. So the dead are often left where they fell. Among them is Shreya Shah Klopp. In 2018, this 32-year-old Austrian woman of Nepali descent reached the summit, but collapsed on the descent. She was seen alive at 8,400 meters, begging for help. Several groups passed by, some too exhausted, others too afraid for their own safety. One Sherpa stopped, tried to give her oxygen, but couldn't hold her. Hours later, she died. Her body remains on the slope. Another story is that of Frances Arsentiev. In 1998, she became the first American woman to summit without supplemental oxygen. On the way down, she lost consciousness. Her husband, Sergei Arsentiev, stayed with her. He spent a night beside her at minus 40 degrees Celsius, trying to keep her warm. At dawn, he went for help, but when he returned, she was gone. She'd slid into a crevasse. Sergei himself died a few years later while attempting to place a memorial cross at that spot. These stories aren't just tragedies, they're ethical challenges. What do you do when you see someone dying just meters away? Stopping means risking your own life. Walking past means betraying human duty. On Everest, this choice is made again and again. And more often than not, self-preservation wins. Strangely, many of the dead were experienced climbers. They knew the risks, but the mountain is deceptive. Sometimes it feels like you'll make it, especially when the summit is already in sight. Just a little farther, a person thinks, and that little farther becomes their last. Bodies become part of the landscape. Some remain recognizable for decades, others are buried by snow, only to reappear years later after avalanches. Mountains don't keep secrets. They reveal them piece by piece. And still, families hold on to hope. Some relatives spend years pleading for recovery missions, but reality is harsh. Even if a body is found, it's rarely brought home. Too expensive, too dangerous. Rainbow Valley isn't just a graveyard, it's a mirror. It shows how far we're willing to go for a goal, and how easily we lose our humanity along the way. But while death on Everest was once an exception, since the 1990s, it has become part of the system. Because the mountain is no longer a test for the chosen few, it has become a commodity. And so, a new question arises. Can you buy the summit? And what happens when ambition meets a credit card? The answer lies in the era of commercial expeditions, where guides sell summit packages, and clients receive not only oxygen, but the illusion of heroism. Are you ready to see how a sacred mountain became a business? By the 1990s, Everest had ceased to be a dream for elite mountaineers. It had become a product, accessible, marketable, and for sale. It all began with the rise of private expedition companies offering summit packages. No decades of training required, no technical climbing expertise needed. Just pay, anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000, and receive a guide, oxygen, food, tents, a fixed route, nominal insurance, and a promise: we'll get you to the summit. Two names stand at the origin of this revolution: Rob Hall and Scott Fisher. A New Zealander and an American, both seasoned climbers, both charismatic leaders. They didn't just lead clients, They built brands. Hall founded Adventure Consultants. Fisher launched Mountain Madness. Their slogans sounded like invitations to an exclusive club. If you're in good shape, we'll handle the rest. But what did good shape really mean? For many clients, it meant being able to walk 10 kilometers through a park. They'd never been above 5,000 meters, didn't know how to use crampons, had no understanding of acclimatization. But they dreamed, and they paid. Guides took them because business demanded volume. More clients meant higher profits. Competition grew. By the mid-1990s, dozens of commercial teams operated on Everest each year. Base camp had turned into a tented city with radios, solar panels, and even bars. The real problem lay elsewhere. These expeditions created an illusion of safety. Clients believed their guide would handle everything, that if things went wrong, they'd be rescued. But in the death zone, there is no rescue. There's only a choice: push on or turn back. And too often, guides, bound by contracts and reputation, hesitated to cancel summit pushes, even as weather deteriorated.
Rob Hall, for instance, was known for his reliability. He never broke the rules. But in May 1996, he made a fatal mistake. He let a client linger too long on the summit, because the man had dreamed of this for so long. That decision cost not only the client's life, but Hall's own. Scott Fisher, by contrast, was more impulsive. He believed in willpower, often ignored fatigue. On that same day, he climbed without oxygen to set an example, but his body gave out. He weakened and lost control of his team. Their tragedy became a turning point. Yet instead of reducing traffic, the industry adapted. Budget operators from Nepal emerged, offering climbs for as little as $25,000. The quality of gear, guide experience, and medical support became variables. The only constant? Sales. Today on Everest, you can meet people who can't tie their bootlaces, but have Instagram accounts with thousands of followers. Their goal isn't to conquer the mountain. It's content. A summit photo, a selfie with a flag, a story for a TED Talk. Strangely, no one stops them. The Nepali government is driven by revenue. A climbing permit costs $11,000 per person. More clients mean more money. Safety comes second. And so Everest transformed from a symbol of human spirit into a commodity, from a test of character into a service. And the more accessible it becomes, the more lives it demands. But the true cost of this accessibility became painfully clear on one fateful day, May 10th, 1996, because that was when the illusion of safety collapsed, and the world saw what lay behind the all-inclusive tour: chaos, ambition, and death. Are you ready to return to that day and understand how everything went wrong? May 10th, 1996 begins as the perfect summit day on Everest. The sky is clear, the wind is light. The weather offers a rare window in the climbing season. On the South Col route, 3 commercial expeditions prepare to ascend simultaneously. Rob Hall's team, Adventure Consultants, Scott Fisher's group, Mountain Madness, and an independent Taiwanese party. More than 30 people are set to climb to the summit on the same day. Right here lies the first mistake. The route through the Hillary Steppe is narrow. Its capacity maxes out at 2 or 3 climbers per minute. Yet no one coordinates movement. Each team operates independently. By noon, a traffic jam forms at the most difficult section. Climbers wait in line for 30 to 40 minutes, losing precious time, oxygen, and strength. Rob Hall, normally strict about schedules, makes an exception for his client Doug Hansen, a middle-aged U.S. postal worker who has dreamed of the summit his entire life. Hansen climbs slowly.
Hall waits. Instead of turning back at the agreed-upon turnaround time, 2 p.m., they reach the summit at 2:30 p.m. It proves fatal. Meanwhile, Scott Fisher, feeling unwell, later determined to be from dehydration and exhaustion, falls behind his group. He loses control of his clients. One of them, American writer Jon Krakauer, future author of Into Thin Air, notices discipline collapsing. People lose orientation. Some remove their gloves to take photos. Others ignore early signs of pulmonary edema. By 3 p.m., clouds gather over the mountain. Temperatures plunge to -40. A blizzard begins. Those already descending can barely see the trail. Those still on the summit are doomed. Hall and Hansen don't even make it to the South Col. They become stranded at 8,700 meters. Hansen loses consciousness. Hall stays with him. Over the radio, he tells base camp, "We can't move." He's urged to leave his client and save himself.
"I don't leave my people," he says. These are his last words.
Scott Fisher loses contact with his team. He's found, late that night, half dead, without oxygen, buried in snow. He dies before dawn. That night, 8 people perish. Among them are not only clients, but experienced guides. It remains the deadliest single-day tragedy in Everest's history. Why did it happen? The answer isn't one cause, but a chain of failures. First, route overcrowding. Too many climbers on the same day, no coordination, no buffer time. Second, ignoring the weather forecast. Meteorologists had warned of an approaching storm, but everyone thought, "We'll make it." Ambition drowned out reason. Third, commercial pressure. Guides knew that if a client didn't summit, they wouldn't pay the bonus, leave a good review, or refer friends. So safety rules gave way to expectations. Fourth, the illusion of control. Clients believed their guide would handle everything. Guides believed their experience would shield them from chaos. But in the death zone, there is no control, only nature, and it is indifferent to your dreams. Jon Krakauer, who survived the disaster, later wrote, "We thought we were conquering the mountain. In truth, we were just renting a little time from it." His book shook the world. Many condemned commercialization. But instead of reform, the industry grew, because tragedy drew attention, and attention meant money. Remarkably, after 1996, the number of people wanting to climb Everest increased. They wanted to experience the same thing, or prove they could survive up there, or simply become part of the legend. But the system didn't change. Traffic jams remained. Budget operators stayed. Client requirements stayed minimal. A medical certificate and a bank transfer were enough. Today, nearly 3 decades later, 1996 no longer looks like a warning. It marks the beginning of a new era, the age of mass tourism on the roof of the world. And this era brought new problems, not just deaths, but trash, thefts, scandals. Because when hundreds climb instead of dozens, the mountain ceases to be a place of solitude. It becomes a gathering place. Imagine this. You're standing in line for the summit, like at Disneyland. Ahead of you, a person in a bright jacket taking selfies. Behind you, someone coughing from pulmonary edema. Underfoot, old oxygen cylinders, frayed ropes, tin cans. This is no longer Mallory's Everest. This is Everest in the 21st century. But how exactly has it changed? What happens there today, beyond the queues? The answer lies in a world where a sacred mountain has become an arena for ego, business, and even crime. Are you ready to see modern Everest without illusions? Today, an Everest climb doesn't begin with training in the Alps. It starts with a Google search. Best company for climbing Everest. Results show dozens of operators, from Nepali firms at $25,000 to elite Western agencies charging $120,000. Everything's included: flights, insurance, guides, oxygen, even a summit guarantee. If you don't reach the top, you get a discount next season. But the reality behind this marketing is different. Every May, 400 to 600 climbers gather on Nepal's South Col route, ready to storm the summit. They move in single file through the Khumbu icefall, where one mistake can cost a life. At the Hillary Step, queues stretch up to 2 hours. People stand in thin air, burning through oxygen, strength, and time. In 2019, a photo of this traffic jam, hundreds of brightly clad figures snaking along the ridge like an ant trail, went viral worldwide. For many, it was the first time they realized Everest is overloaded. But the problem isn't just people, it's also trash. Over recent decades, more than 50 tons of waste have accumulated on the slopes. Empty oxygen cylinders, broken tents, tin cans, batteries, and human excrement. Base camp resembles a landfill. Although Nepali authorities require every climber to carry down 8 kilograms of garbage, enforcement is weak. Fines are rarely imposed, and no one wants to haul away someone else's trash.
Even worse is theft. In the death zone, where every gram counts, oxygen bottles become currency. There have been cases where entire caches vanished, right from camps. In 2023, a team reported their oxygen supply stolen overnight. Without it, death. One victim later said, "I never expected people to steal life-saving oxygen at 8,000 meters." Scandals go beyond theft. In 2019, a well-known Nepali guide refused to help a client struggling to breathe, saying, "That's not part of the package." The client survived only by chance, thanks to another Sherpa. But the incident revealed a harsh truth. Even trust in your guide is an illusion. And in 2022, a diplomatic row erupted when a Russian climber raised his national flag on the summit, ignoring international appeals to avoid political gestures. His actions sparked widespread criticism and reminded the world that even on the roof of the planet, people can't leave their conflicts behind. Strangely, despite all this, demand keeps growing, especially among so-called weekend climbers, people with no experience but plenty of money and Instagram ambitions. They undergo minimal acclimatization, rely entirely on guides, and often fail to grasp that in the death zone, there's no cancellation or refund. The Nepali government, earning millions from permits, has responded slowly. In 2024, new rules were introduced. Mandatory prior ascent of a 6,500-meter peak, medical screening, and a garbage deposit. But experts are skeptical. Will this work? Or just fuel a black market for fake certificates? Meanwhile, Sherpas continue to bear the heaviest burden. They fix ropes, carry loads, rescue clients, and increasingly they say, "We're tired of being invisible." Some now demand their names be included in official reports. Others are launching their own guiding companies to control their working conditions. Yet the mountain remains indifferent to all these changes. It doesn't notice traffic jams. It doesn't see trash. It doesn't hear scandals. It simply stands and waits. Because, in the end, Everest isn't an attraction. It's a test. And no matter how commercial, chaotic, or cynical the world below becomes, on the summit, there's only you, your fear, your conscience, your choice. So perhaps the real question isn't whether you can climb Everest, but whether you deserve to. And if you, the viewer, ever wonder about that, know this: the mountain is already listening.